Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Shells and Shadows podcast. Today, I have a special guest here with me, Professor Amos Guiora, who is a professor of law at the University of Utah. Who I got connected through a dear friend of mine, Jesse Ravener. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
I want to jump right in and have my listeners get to know your story. So you've had a lot of experience throughout your life, from working in the IDF as a lawyer to teaching here in the U.S. and everything in between, a lot of advocacy work that you've done. Why don't you start we can talk about where your life began and what drove you to make a difference in the world.
When you say I have lots of experience, that's euphemism from an old guy. I like that. So the quick 5-second overview is I was born in Israel in 1957. Indeed, as you know, both my parents were Holocaust survivors. We came to the States in 1963 because my late father wanted to have an academic career in America, which is why ultimately I grew up in Ann Arbor because my father taught at the University of Michigan. I went to Quinney College in Gambier, Ohio. I went to law school at Case Western Reserve in Cleveland. And then I made Aliyah. I moved back to Israel because I was born in Israel, so not exactly Aliyah, in 1985. As you correctly note, I served for 20 years in the IDF, and I retired in 2004 when I came back to the States to teach initially at Case Western Reserve in Cleveland, where I had gone for 3 years. And then I've been here at the Quinney College of Law since July of 2007.
Amazing. Thank you. So when I think back to my life and the lives of other people who've shared their experience on this podcast, a big theme that comes up is mentorship. We all have people who come into our lives kind of with no coincidence at the right time to help empower us to realize our greatest potential and push us to take a step, take a leap of faith, so to say, and do something that's maybe out of our comfort zone, but will ultimately lead us to, realize our potential. So what were those figures for you in your early life, and how did that?
So the most important in many ways was my history professor at Quinney College, Professor Evans, who my junior year, his wife, like me, was second generation, like me, only child, and like me, knew nothing about the Holocaust. Professor Evans is Gentile. And Professor Evans said to me that, at some point you need to come to grips with Jewishness, Judaism, the Holocaust. And I said, I didn't even thought about any of these issues. And I said, okay, sure, what do I do? And he said, write an honors thesis about the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And to my everlasting, non-ending embarrassment, shame, I had no idea what he was talking about and figured it out. And then I came home and told my parents, who had great respect for Professor Evans. He really was my dominant mentor in college. And I said, Professor Evans suggested I write an honors thesis about Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And my mom looked at my dad and said, it's time for dinner. And that's important because when I was 12, my late father had taken me canoeing in Ann Arbor and told me, in 1 minute, I'll tell you my story, his story in the Holocaust, 1 minute, your mother's story. And that's the first and last time we'll ever have this conversation. So I grew up in a home with 2 Holocaust survivors where the word Holocaust is never mentioned. There are no books on the Holocaust. I know nothing about my parents. And I wrote the honors thesis about the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. I have no idea if my parents ever read it. I really, really don't know. But there is no doubt that Professor Evans, forever grateful, in a sense confronted me. And I think that's exactly what a mentor does. And he, for me, is the dominant mentor. Mm-hmm. The other person who obviously was dominant for me is my late father, with whom I had a great relationship. But my father was not the type who would freely hand out advice. He was very cautious in handing out advice, which is something I resonate with. So I think in the context of mentorship, all credit to Professor Evans.
Mm. Yeah, and some of the premise of this podcast is based around the Jungian idea from depth psychology of the shadow, where there are these parts of our lives, both as individuals and as a collective, that cast a shadow upon us. And so we often don't want to face these parts, and yet when we do, it can be this greatest source of our strength. So it's special to hear that you connected to this idea that maybe wasn't talked about in your household. I think we do live in a world today for our betterment that these sorts of ideas are talked about. We do talk about the very difficult things to discuss, but I think we're better off for it.
So the word shadows is interesting because in Hebrew, the expression, you've been to Israel, right, is Chaim b'tzel shel HaShoah, we live in the shadow of the Holocaust.
Wow.
And there are people who would say that's not quite correct. We still live in the Holocaust. Without being in the Holocaust, we're still in it, and to some extent. So this expression that we live in the shadow of the Holocaust, I don't think there's any doubt about that. And I think, the older I get, take how I spent my morning. I went to Kennedy Junior High School here in Salt Lake City. Next month, I'm going to Eisenhower Junior High School to speak to 6th, 7th, and 8th graders about the Holocaust. And I do it through the lens of my late parents. My mother was 12. So when you speak to 12-year-olds about my mom being 12 in the Holocaust, even though I'm not quite sure what they get out of it, even though they are reading The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. And my mother was in the attic. So my mother in many ways is Anne Frank. I mean, Anne Frank's story is similar to my mother's story, with the exception that Anne Frank is captured, killed. My mother survived, but also how she survives is a remarkable story. And I use that to differentiate with something we can happily discuss, the difference between bystanders and upstanders.
Yeah.
So my mother survived in part because of a upstander, an elderly Catholic woman who, my mother was in the attic with my grandmother. And this elderly Catholic woman who we don't know her name, my mother could not remember her name, brought food to my mom and grandmother every day, goes up the stairs in the attic, brings them food. That's an upstander. And that's what I talked about this morning with the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. But it is interesting the way you phrase shadow. I think it's true that at least I can testify as to myself. The older I get and the more I write about the Holocaust, the more I read about the Holocaust, there's no doubt that for me, all roads run through the Holocaust. Absolutely.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. I just graduated from CU Boulder, and outside of our library, there's a quote that says, "He who knows only his generation always remains a child." And very powerful quote. So when you talk about this idea of bystanders and upstanders, looking to something like the Holocaust as a way for us to understand maybe some of what's going on in the world today, because we have to look at what happened in the past to really understand how to approach the future. How have you helped educate people in that way through your work as a teacher or professor?
Yeah, so I'm not one to comment on how I teach or write. I will say, leave that to others. I will say that of the books I've written, the book, The Crime of Complicity, The Bystander, and the Holocaust, and I can send you a link and you can do with it what you want to do with it. That book at least gave me the chance to inquire as to who my parents were. My mother did not want me to write the book. My father was already dying, and I knew he was dying while I was writing it. And I think my mother didn't want me to write it because she didn't want me to address issues that they had never discussed with me. And I wrote about them through the lens of the bystander in her situation in Budapest and my father's escape from the camp where he was in Yugoslavia, Serbia. And that book, for me, of all the books I've written, at least for me, I think was the most impactful. It's also been translated into Dutch and Chinese, and I've lectured on the book, by now worldwide, because it really forced me to address who were my parents, and I think that was essential, obviously, for me, because when I began the book, I knew nothing about them. I can't emphasize enough. I mean, obviously, I knew who my parents were, but I knew nothing about their experiences.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you sharing that, and I got to come and listen to you have a lecture at the local synagogue yesterday about it. I found it very fascinating because you can draw a lot of parallels between, I guess, a line that goes through history where themes reappear, history repeats itself. I think it's important for today's generation to understand through the lens of those who've come before us, because that's where we learn. Those are our teachers. You made a comment at the beginning of the podcast where I called you experience, right? As a way of calling you old.
Elderly.
elderly. However, I do believe that my generation in today's world, there was a culture that we moved out of where we used to turn to our elders to understand life. And today, I mean, if you look at the past, people used to live in a household with multiple generations. You were getting wisdom from your parents, your grandparents, and if you're lucky, your great grandparents. And in today's world, it's not as much like that. So to have people share their experiences beyond just from the bubble of my generation is, I find it helpful.
So that's very interesting. First of all, you get your education through social media. When I spoke this morning at Kennedy, I think that if my parents knew that this is how I was spending my Monday morning talking to 6th, 7th, 8th graders about their experiences, they would be extremely uncomfortable.
Really?
Absolutely. My parents, throughout my life, when they were asked to come speak at whatever Holocaust-related event, never agreed, ever. What I do when I'm writing about the Holocaust, like yesterday at Kolami discussing the Holocaust, I think it would cause my parents, in particular my mother, discomfort, because I think for them, like other Holocaust survivors, there's a real split amongst Holocaust survivors. I don't know the percentages, of course, but some say we've moved on, right? And others, I have friends who every night at dinner, everything was about the Holocaust. And my parents fell into the camp where it was not discussed. And the last thing I am is judgmental about my parents. I have great respect for what decision they made. When I went with my dad on a Holocaust roots trip 25 years ago, unfortunately, these were the conditions. I couldn't film him. I couldn't take pictures of him, and I couldn't really ask questions. Mm-hmm. And in retrospect, in terms of shadows, right, that's an opportunity missed. And the other part, I think, of your shadows, which is a super interesting theme, is those who don't learn from history are deemed to repeat it. And that's why, my very, very modest contribution, I do a lot of public speaking, worldwide. But there's no doubt that for me, at least for me, the most impactful are meeting with junior high school students. Because I think, first of all, for them to understand, at least to learn it, and a shout out, it's not a given. I told the teachers and the principal and the students this morning, when I was them, 50 odd years ago, nobody was doing something like this, bring in Holocaust survivors, second generation, or whatever, to talk about things like this at all school assembly. Think about this, it was an all school assembly. Pretty impressive, right? Yeah. For all 6th, 7th, 8th, whatever it was like 250 kids there. I don't remember when I was in 6th grade anything like this. I certainly don't remember that in junior high. I have no idea what it's like in other cities in Utah or other cities in the United States. But if this is an example, and if, again, my very modest contribution contributes to that, what you call the shadow, which I call not learning from history, they're interrelated. It's very interesting, the theme you suggest here. Yeah. I think it's at least for me, as the only child of 2 Holocaust survivors, to address these issues.
Yeah. Does having these conversations, and I guess the willingness today to have them, give you hope for the future? Hope is
no. That's an interesting word. I don't know if I would use the word hope. I think more than anything, I have by now a sense of a duty, an obligation. Hope. If I can make these kids somehow take the Holocaust, which is without a doubt unimaginable and beyond any scope of, from their perspective, understanding, and somehow tie it to their lives and or experiences. And the way I do it is, they're sitting in front of me, all these, 12, 13-year-old kids. And I say to them, I assume that some of you here have been victims of bullies. I hope none of you have been bullies, but I assume X percentage of you are vulnerable. And I think somebody said to me that they understand the attic metaphorically, the sense of danger. For some kids, school's the only place they get a hot meal. And some of these kids clearly, unfortunately, see unpleasant family circumstances. And in that sense, somebody told me that what these talks do is it makes the Holocaust relatable, whatever that word means. And two, for me, because this is what my scholarship focuses on, is it highlights the negatives of the bystander and the positive of the upstander. So in that sense, if it makes a modest contribution, if they go home and they think about it. There was one little kid, actually when I finished the talk, it was very interesting how many of them rushed up to get the picture with me, the selfie with me. How many of them wanted my autograph? And then there were kids who hung around to ask me questions. There was a 12-year-old boy who told me he wants to become a lawyer, and he's debating whether he wants to be a prosecutor or a defense attorney. And I thought, whoa, that's great. He says, how do I get into law school? 12 years old.
Wow.
And I said, well, you need really good grades. He said, I have really good grades. I said, we're going to have to study a lot. And he said, I study a lot. And I said, you have to be open to other things. He said, I am open to other things. I'm going to be a lawyer. Is that great?
Yeah, that is great. No, it is. And you touched on something there about duty and a sense of responsibility. Touching on this idea of shadow, there's the individual shadow of the self and the collective shadow of a people, so to say. A lot of people in my generation who have lived through, say, October 7th on college campuses, look to the past, look to the conditions that people like your parents lived through, and where they didn't have the space to vocalize their beliefs and create real change in universities and college campuses to help people become aware of anti-Semitism in its modern form. And there's a sense of duty, there's a sense of responsibility that comes up, not to undo what has been done in the past, but to know that because we are here, we have that duty and the privilege to continue standing up.
So I think I said yesterday at Kolami, when people want to be critical of Israel, I mean, fine. You probably won't find anybody more critical of Netanyahu than me, but there's a difference between being critical of Netanyahu and being critical of Israel. My concern with those who are quick to criticize is the degree of their knowledge. And I think to be critical is fine, but you need to know what you're talking about. And when I, post October 7th, I mean, we all saw the on-campus criticism of Israel, which is totally legitimate. Free speech, that's fine. But I would always suggest, modestly, have a sense that you have some base in history. It goes back to your question about history. I mean, October 7th happened. You can't talk about what happens after October 7th without talking about October 7th and the events of October 7th. History is important, and you're 100% right. And I do fear that the rush to judgment of critical judgment of Israel, fine, was not always based in actual knowledge of what the events were and what the history is.
Like you said, my generation learns from social media.
Well, I probably would suggest, if I may, a gentle rephrase of that. Your generation reads social media. That doesn't mean they're learning from social media. Okay. They're perhaps impacted by social media.
Okay. That's a good distinction.
There's a difference there.
So we've started talking about Israel. I want to shift for a moment and talk about that leap that you took, that you were pushed to take by mentors of yours to learn about your heritage and then eventually make Aliyah and join the IDF. Not necessarily by choice. I was 13 years old, but my family also made Aliyah.
Oh, they took you to Israel.
They took me with them. And it's been a very impactful experience for me. I'd love to hear how it was for you. And we began talking about it before this, but if you could share for the listeners,
sure,
how that was.
So I moved. They took you at 13, right?
Correct.
Okay. We came in the other direction. They brought me here when I was 6, right?
Okay.
So I came for first grade.
All right.
You went in for 13 is about that 7th, 8th grade, somewhere in there.
In 7th grade.
In that difficult, complicated age.
Yes.
risk,
To say the least.
which is easy. First grade's easier, right?
Right.
When I moved, as we call it Aliyah, when I moved back to Is, I was 28. I was not 13.
Mm-hmm.
I had a clear sense of what I wanted to do. After we had left Israel in '63, for a number of years, we went back every summer to visit my grandparents. And again, I spoke a modicum of Hebrew, basic Hebrew, but I had been to Israel. But I don't think there's any doubt in retrospect, when I think back, when I moved to Israel 40 years ago, I thought I knew something about Israel. In retrospect, I think I did not. I probably had the typical rose-colored glasses take on Israel.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, again, I had this job offer at the University of Michigan or Ann Arbor, or moved to Israel. Once I made the decision, it was clear to me. And obviously, there's no doubt that I made the absolute right decision. I am in that very fortunate position. I was thinking about it this morning on the way to meeting with the junior high school students. I'm 68 and a half, right? I have no regrets about anything that I've decided to do. I'm very, 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 very fortunate. So I moved to Israel. When I went into the IDF, I think 4 months after I made Aliyah, my Hebrew was weak, was polite. What got me through boot camp was that I was in good shape, and I was the oldest by about 10 years. You make your way through. Officer training there too, I was in good shape. I had a great commander who understood that I'm going to have to pass this thing. And I was always, focused, determined, because there was a larger goal. I wanted to get into the JAC Corps and start serving in the JAC Corps. And for me, from a career perspective, it was the right thing. And there's no doubt that at least for me, there's a direct interaction or link. It's interesting the way you phrased it, between, say, history and serving, because remember that in Hebrew, you speak Hebrew. We don't lo ovdim b'tzava. We don't work in the army. We shaltim, serve. There's a difference between work and serve. And I, as a Zionist, 100% viewed serving in the IDF as something that was clearly of great importance to me. So it worked well for me.
Mm. Yeah, that idea of service. You mentioned how you were a great critic of the current powers in the Israeli government, but you love the country so deeply. This is something that I think everyone experiences, who is in this loving relationship with this country, right? It's a beautiful country, and yet it's something we wrestle with in a way. If you look back to the origins of the name Yisrael, it literally translates to he who wrestles with God. And in a way, that's part of your story. That's part of my story in a very different way. You have so much love for this country, but you also want to fix it. And that's like a wrestling of sorts.
We're in 2026. So whenever this present government began with its judicial reform, was that 21, 22, whenever it was, I've been to hundreds of demonstrations. I have a book coming out in May about the enablers in Netanyahu, about looking at it through the lens of judicial reform and the hostages. I like, those the other 400,000 of us who are out there every Saturday night in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Haifa, everywhere else, 20 million Americans by comparison, relatively. Clear that we all are super critical of the government, but all obviously dedicated, devoted to the state. Think about this. There were 400,000 reserve soldiers over the course of the past 2 years, people doing up to 450 days, 450 days over the 2 years. Families falling apart, divorce rates, suicide, businesses collapsing, but people showing up immediately. Look at on October 7th, 6:29 in the morning, 100% plus reserve units are filled with people answering. People weren't even called and they showed up. I think that tells you a lot. On the other hand, you are right. I think it was the Haaretz, the newspaper, the Israeli version of the New York Times. I think 4 or 5 years ago, maybe more, did a major series articles on, are you an Israeli or are you Jewish?
Interesting.
And you are either this or this. Obviously, I define as an Israeli. I served in the military. My wife served in the military. Or obviously, our kids served in the military. And the Orthodox Jews who don't serve in the military, this complicated deal they made with the government, whenever the state was created 7 years ago, and Netanyahu keeps feeding into it. Here we are post October 7th, and you still don't have any sense of obligation, duty to the state, because we are guided here by the FCC in polite language. I cannot begin to describe to you how much I loathe them, and that's the polite version. Either you're in it or you're not in it. And those of us who protested Saturday after Saturday, listen, it's hard. In the summer it's hot, it's humid, in the winter it's raining. I did twice the walk from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. I did 3 days both times. Is it fun? No, it's not. Is it fun, the verbal abuse from Netanyahu supporters? No, it's not. Is it a physical effort? Sure. On the other hand, especially with the hostages, I remember that, as I said yesterday by Kolami, when I met Matan Sangokur's mother, Inav, and she was the most visible Holocaust hostage parent, Sangokur. And I said to Inav, I as a parent don't know what to say to you. And Inav said to me, she shook my hand and she said, the factory here is enough. And they, every Saturday night, were thanking us for coming to be with them. And if, my very modest contribution, whether coming to the rallies or I spoke twice and spoke in Haifa and Jerusalem, I think we all have that, duty obligation. Those who don't see it that way are not going to be involved, hopefully, when this government loses in the election in October of this year. And what needs to happen, which is the rebuilding of the state intra, we don't need help from anyone. We need to rebuild in terms of our traditional values, democracy, liberal democracy, rule of law, which this government is making an active effort to kill day in, day out. But this will be a fight, but it'll be an intra fight, not an inter fight.
It's a very interesting question. Are you a Jew or an Israeli? In a way, that sort of question is what we've seen people in the rest of the world outside of Israel use as a way of justifying anti-Zionism and the anti-Zionist movement, because we have this concept of anti-Semitism, which is anti-Jewish, but if it's violent statements towards Israelis or Israel as a whole, then it's somehow justifiable. So how do you think we as Jews or Israelis have to approach that identity that in the modern world we do have Israel, but what's kept us together prior to that has been that Jewish identity?
Yes, but so for instance, and you could bring in 5 other people and get 20 different opinions. For me, people who are critical of Israel, that does not inherently make them anti-Semitic. I have friends who very much disagree with me, which is fine. I mean, look at me. I'm super critical and I'm not at all anti-Semitic.
Right.
I do have friends who totally disagree with me, which means I'm right and they're wrong. That's fine. That if you criticize Israel, you're anti-Semitic. The question of are you an Israeli or a Jew, a friend shared with me, and I had missed this. After the 1996 election, which is when Netanyahu becomes prime minister for the first time, when he defeats Peres after the Rabin assassination of November '95, according to my friend, that Peres said in this article in the New Yorker that Jews won, Israel lost. 96, interesting. I don't remember Peres saying that. But for me, my Israel, if you will, is, again, liberal democracy predicated on the rule of law. Yes, respect for Jewish tradition, but in no way can this perception or misperception of however it's portrayed of Jewishness, if you will, speaking as an Israeli, not as an American, that can't justify that you are not a part of society. And as an Israeli, the number one criteria for me of being an Israeli is serving in the IDF. And if you use Jewishness, we need to go to the yeshiva. If I hear that anymore, if I hear that again, then that for me is Jewishness and not Israeliness. And we are in conflict with them. If you watch their demonstrations, first of all, are violent. And the police treat them with kid gloves. It drives me crazy. They don't treat us with kid gloves. The police treat them with kid gloves. And then they hold up signs, Mavet Me'al Hagiyus, better death than drafting, being better dead than being drafted. I say, Zai Gazunt, you want to die, die, but you got to serve. You have to go serve. And then they say, well, if we will be drafted, we'll leave. And I say, you want to leave? Leave. The only problem is nobody will take them because they're unemployable because they don't have any life skills. On the other hand, us Israelis have politically, government after government, for political reasons, acquiesced to this, and that is a huge problem. And I really do believe, because of the draft bill which is on the table, and I don't think it'll pass because even members of Netanyahu's party, I mean, their children have served in the last 2 years, and if you have a draft bill which gives this wide-ranging, it's called a draft bill. It's actually an anti-draft bill. I don't think it'll pass, but I think if it does pass, given the significant manpower shortage that the IDF had over the course of the past 2 years, for me, it's a very simple, are you in or are you out? I'll even share a story with you. My middle child was then, I don't know, 6, 7, 8. And I drove into Jerusalem, and at the entrance to Jerusalem, there was some protest of the Haredim, the Orthos. And I rolled down my window. There was an Orthodox guy my age demonstrating. I do not remember what they were demonstrating from. I said to him, I rolled down my window, and I said, I got to give it to you straight. I hate you. He said, why do you hate me? He said, and I said to him, because when my son, who's, let's say he was 6, 7, will be of military age, he'll be lying in some ambush somewhere, and your kid will be on my dime in yeshiva. And he said to me, if I think about it that way, then you're right. So yay for him for responding that way. Had he ever thought about it before? Hell, I don't know. But for me, as someone whose children, again, my entire family has served, obviously, there's a line. And either you're in or you're out.
Mm-hmm. Something unique and special I feel about diaspora Jews is that within Israel, there's a lot of division, and that whole question of are you a Jew or are you an Israeli comes up. I think in the U.S. in particular, at least from the interactions I've had, that merging of those identities within our hearts, so to say.
Our hearts as Israelis or as Americans?
As American Jews, is so natural that question almost seems strange to ask. Maybe you don't use the word Israeli, but like Zionist, right? Because not being in Israel, we don't have the privilege of just being another Jew or another Israeli and part of this mass society. And so that identity becomes so intertwined because you are so isolated from and separate from your homeland, so to say. I do think that's just like a beautiful part of living in the U.S. that I've seen. Being a Jew, being an Israeli, there isn't as much of that division. That debate of what you're talking about doesn't happen quite as much.
So I leave. I'm at my age. You know what you know, and you know what you don't know. So I am the last person in any way to claim any expertise on American Jewry or American Jewishness. I will say the following. When American Jewish friends tell me, for instance, Israel's got to do this, and Israel's need to be more soldiers here, and Israel got to do this. My first reaction, because again, FCC guidelines here, I have to be polite, is remind me what IDF unit your son serves in, or your daughter. And I know the answer, they don't. And until your own child is in harm's way, you are requested to keep your opinion to yourself. I'll tell you a story. My late father had this huge listserv of it was like his take on the world every week. Okay. I mean, there were people here, there, and everywhere. There was even a person who was running for prime minister in Israel who wanted to buy the listserv from my dad. And my dad said, thank you, no. And when my middle child was inducted, my dad put out there that, his grandson is now, and somebody wrote him back, a guy who who recently passed, who I liked a lot. He was a colleague of my dad's. Wait in, Israel's got to do this and Israel's got to do that. And my father responded back. They were friends. And my father wrote him back and said, as of today, you are kindly requested to keep your opinion to yourself. Mm-hmm. And my father was right. Unless your child, boy or girl, is in harm's way, take a deep breath.
Yes, I do agree. And like you said yesterday during your talk, it is a big mistake of the Israeli government to dismiss the power.
I said disdainful.
That
they're disdainful of the diaspora.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the image that people get of what Israel is comes from Israel's representatives, so to say, of people living out throughout the world, for better or worse, right? But oftentimes I see that it is a powerful thing in a very positive way. And so, yeah, maybe not inserting opinions where opinions are not requested. But I do think there's a special thing to that. Having lived there, obviously I didn't serve. My family's all American, but yeah, that's my take.
Yeah, again, I'm no expert on American Jewry or American Jewishness, because I confess, I view everything through the lens of Israel 100%. And there's no doubt whatsoever that the past 2 years until the last hostage was brought home 2 weeks ago, for me, all roads 100% led through the hostages and soldiers in harm's way unnecessarily in Gaza. And I don't use these words lightly, believe me, but I've said this, in interviews, and so if I've said it before, I can say it here. I'm of the opinion that many soldiers died in vain. As the father of a soldier, that is a horrible, horrible thing to say about someone else's child, a brother, a sister, daughter, husband, wife, that they died in vain serving the IDF. And my anger, understatement, at the Netanyahu government, at Netanyahu, because in the context of the hostages, for me, he absolutely has blood on his hands, and soldiers died in vain. And that is beyond unforgivable. He will take that to his grave.
I want to touch on another topic now that is related, and it's the idea of decision making. How do we make difficult decisions in very high stakes scenarios? So you, in your role in the IDF, I'm sure at times had to make very difficult decisions. How can you speak on, also from your direct experience, but generally as a human being, how do we go about making those difficult decisions while trying to account for all the factors?
So I can only speak as to my own experiences, and you are right. I was involved in what Israel is called targeted killing, which the United States calls drone policy. And so if you are involved in that, you are involved in the ultimate decision in life. Is this person a legitimate target, and can they be killed? Anybody like me who was involved in that is to call that the most powerful obligation duty, obligation, responsibility that can be imposed or placed on an individual, 100%. But at the end of the day, you're there and you are tasked with it and you are equipped to make the decision. It's certainly not easy, but I don't want to glorify it. It's a decision that needs to be made. In terms of decision making, I think I leave that to others, but I think I largely fall in the camp where I've never had difficulty making decisions without making light of the decision. It's complicated. And there are obviously innumerable circumstances, considerations, factors that you need to consider. But at the end of the day, the rubber hits the road, and go, no go. And once you've decided one way or the other, whatever your decision is, you've made a decision. You need to live with it. I think it's probably fair to state I'm no expert on. I've never studied decision making. I was involved, in addition to my IDF career. I think it's fair to state is divided. It's like a yin yang of legal aspects of operational counterterrorism and the years I spent negotiating implementation of the Oslo peace process. And there were days I was doing the two of them together the same day. Man. And I was involved officially in negotiating implementation from 94 to 99. And then from 2010 to 2018, I was involved in what is called Track 2 negotiations, which are back channel, off the record negotiations between people who actually know something but do not represent this side or this side. We met, again, I think 8 years. Small groups, not important where, not important who. And that's what I did unofficially. And I assume I was invited to participate in that based on the 5 years, and in particular, an article I wrote, if I recall correctly. But if you think about it, negotiating and then in the same day being involved in operational counterterrorism, it's probably not by chance that I have less hair than you do.
So with the idea of decision making does come the possibility that you'll make a mistake because we're human. How do you cope with mistakes that you might have made or you feel you've made?
No. So I would say I won't get into details, obviously. It's either 96 or 97. I don't remember. I gave a legal opinion on a particular matter that was wrong. Mm-hmm. That legal decision of mine, legal opinion, which was wrong, led to operational decision making that would have had very, very significant consequences. During the course of I gave that opinion on a Saturday night in a meeting. By the time I got home, I knew I had made a mistake. But once I was the legal advisor to the Gaza Strip. Once you render a legal opinion, off we go. And an operational plan was put into place based on my legal opinion. And I was brought in on every working group that there was leading up to the go decision. And the go was going to be between Thursday night and Friday night. It took 5 days to put this plan in place. And on Thursday evening, in the last preparatory meeting, small group, I asked to meet with the commander one-on-one, with whom I had a very good working relationship. And I told him that I recommend canceling the operation. And he said, I've heard you. Thank you very much. We're going forward. He was senior to me, and he said, because we're going forward and because you are the legal advisor and you and I have this working relationship, you will be with me wherever I go during the operation. You will be there. I said, of course, you're the commander. Aye. That was lawful. It was lawful. It was wrong in legal opinion, but it was a lawful order. So he said, wherever I go, you'll go. And he said, we're starting at, let's say, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. And I said, okay. And he said, well, we'll set up a bed for you. Go to sleep for a couple hours. And the deal had been that somebody would wake me up like at 3, 4 in the morning, right? Yep. And I woke up like at 5, and nobody had awakened me. And my first thought was, fill in the blank. You fill in the blank. You didn't bring me. You know. And I went outside and I found the person who was supposed to wake me. And I said, like, where is everybody? And he said they canceled the operation.
Wow.
I subsequently met with the commander, and I said, did you cancel the operation because of our chat, late Thursday evening? And he said, next question. And I said, okay, fair enough. I don't need to know the answer. Fair enough. And then there was a subsequent meeting, call it like a lessons learned after action report. I remember sitting, who I sat next to, who I liked the guy. And I said, I'm going to absolutely get berated here, 100 million %. And I said, the berating is 100% justified. And when the 2-star looked at me and berated me, reprimanded me, I turned to the person sitting next to me who I really did like. And I said, something like, I told you. And we moved on. But that, I was a legal advisor, and my legal advice in that one instance was wrong. And would have had pretty significant consequences. And I'm delighted that at the end of the day, the operation was canceled. It caused me enough sleep to lose that week. And I can't imagine what it would have been like if the operation had gone forward. And it was clear that if they were done reverse engineering, it was 100 million % based on me.
Yeah, I want to unpack that for a second. So, decision that could have resulted in a lot of harm, right? You gave over your opinion. They decided to go through with it, but you realized it was wrong. And from the looks of it, it was going to happen.
But it was legal. Right?
Yes.
It was. I want to emphasize, it was legal, 100% legal.
Yes. But from the looks of it, it was going to happen. And you couldn't really do anything about it. You just had to accept it. Okay, commander's orders.
Right. But you make every effort to convince that you backtrack.
Correct.
And I had enough, what's the word, enough credibility, whatever, that I was given the opportunity to present the I made a mistake argument. Absolutely.
Okay. So this may be, just bear with me here.
Please.
I'm a big believer in the idea that you don't have to call it God because it's like this big word, but I do think that there's a higher order of things, you could call it a rhythm that exists in our world that is for the good and is guiding things for the good. Do you think that, or do you believe, so let me back up for a second. When we make mistakes, we often put it on ourselves and we say that this is 100% my fault. And responsibility is important, and taking responsibility is very important. But we can also sometimes back up and say, well, maybe I'm an actor within a larger grand play here.
There may be others who think that way. 100 million gazillion % do not think that way.
Okay.
I don't know. Not even close.
Okay.
Now, I wouldn't even know how to translate that into practicality.
That's all right. As a kind of core philosophy of mine, I wanted to explore that.
Not at all.
Okay, sounds good. So then, in dealing with that idea of regret in life, you said you don't have regret. That's a good thing. But for someone,
I'm very fortunate.
Right. For someone who may make a mistake and feel that intense sense of regret, how can they find, I guess, self-compassion and move forward from that?
I leave that to others to determine whether I'm compassionate or, you've heard me speak now twice, right? I think I'm pretty direct without sweeteners. I have enormous respect for the vulnerable. I write about the vulnerable. My books are about the vulnerable. And in trying to address how the harm occurred to them. If you think about my books about sexual assault survivors and telling their stories for the purpose of holding enablers and bystanders accountable, I don't know, does that make me compassionate? I think it makes that I'm I listen to stories of others, and then modestly I say, I think I have the ability to take others' stories and to turn it into a narrative for a larger purpose in terms of the books I've written for criminalizing enablers and bystanders. And I think, I've spent, by now, I've interacted with sexual assault survivors in various forms from over 30 countries by now. And people reach out to me all the time. I don't want to say I wake up every morning to an email from a survivor. I wake up many mornings to emails from survivors who are reaching out to me. This is what they tell me, because I'm the only law professor who writes about enablers, the ecosystem of enabling. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, I don't know if that makes me compassionate. It makes me super focused on the need for accountability. And I don't like the word, I'm sure there's a better word, to use. I don't like the word use, but to use their story to tell a larger story, which is about the need for accountability. But back to your question, for me, it's not predicated at all on religion, philosophy, higher being, lower being. I'm just a modest law professor who's doing his very modest best to address what I perceive to be a serious issue, which is the role of the enabler and the bystander.
Yeah, thank you. I want to shift directions here as we kind of move towards a conclusion. I'd like to leave people with.
Real quick, can you go into a little bit of bystanders and enablers in our society today, like how it
And
how it shows up, like not connected to the Holocaust, not connected to the stuff, but connected to society, like that lens that he's taken bystanders and enablers with like division, spreading hate, etc. A little bit.
Yeah, we can, if I'm understanding correctly, like how that idea of bystander and enabler is showing up in our world today, just generally. Okay. So how do you see this idea of bystander or enabler showing up in our world today generally?
So when the law school established the Bystander Initiative, I can send you a link to that. The idea is to criminalize bystanders and enablers, whether in the United States or state by state, nationally, in different countries. The primary focus in the past 10 years has been almost exclusively bystanders, enablers, and sexual assaults. I've written about Penn State, Ohio State, Catholic Church, USA Gymnastics, been writing about University of Michigan. And for me, it's the ecosystem of enabling. As I talked to yesterday in Colamy, the sexual assault survivors like Maddie Larson and Tiffany Thomas, who were assaulted, Maddie 750 times, and Tiffany 150 times by Larry Nasser, the doctor. But without the enablers, that doesn't happen. In terms of larger society, I think I mentioned yesterday that nothing will come of it. To write a book examining enablers through the generations, beginning with Hitler and then to Trump and then to Netanyahu, that book will not happen. But the book that is coming out in May is about Israeli government officials, ministers, who enabled Netanyahu. And that, for me, was a book that was very, very, very important to write, because I am absolutely convinced that without the enablers, and I named them in the book, specific individuals, that the actions of the past 5 years, the judicial reform, and the abandonment of the hostages, even though they're finally home, would not have been possible without enablers. So to your question, with all due respect to perpetrators, Prime Ministers, Netanyahu, perpetrators, sexual assault survivors, sexual assault predators. It is all about the enabler. And that really was what I have dedicated myself to. And I've been very fortunate that by now there have been over 20 students who have worked, not for me, but worked with me, writing books, articles, doing interviews, and working with legislators around the world. Because I'm absolutely convinced, or at least I've convinced myself, that absent the enabler, the harm, hostages, in many ways also Holocaust, and sexual assault survivors would not have happened the way it did happen. And in that sense, the common thread, if you will, is the enabler. With respect to society here, yesterday when I talked about Minneapolis. So you think about Minneapolis and you think about ICE. ICE is ICE, whatever his name is, the former head of ICE, the guy who's been pushed aside, Bovino. Okay. But somebody's enabling that conduct. And 2 people were killed. And I think that's an issue that absolutely demands our attention. It's challenging because the enabler is not present. There's crime of omission, crime of commission. But I think if we're serious about addressing these powerful contemporary issues, polite word for challenges, dilemmas, then it's absolutely it's a requirement to address the issue of the enabler.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that comes back to the idea of personal responsibility or duty, so to say, that we have as just human beings living in the world. A lot of these issues that we're talking about can feel rather large, out of our control. Feels like maybe there's nothing we can do about it, but there are things within our circle of control that we can do. Like just from my own personal life, going on to campus and waving an Israeli flag with my peers. We couldn't change what was happening overseas, but that was something that was in our control. And so that brings me to this idea, and I'm going to quote Viktor Frankl on this, and I'm sure you know this quote, quoting Nietzsche when he said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." And so this could be...
That's from The Meaning of Man? Yeah.
This can be anything, really. It can be a value that we hold on to. It can be our life's work. For some people, it's God. For some people, it's just a mission that they want to fulfill. And when we think of all of these realities in our world that can make us feel out of control, when we come back to our why, we realize that we as individuals have the power to do something in accordance with our why. So what has been your why? What has been that guiding principle or mission that has kind of led you through your life?
I don't know if I have a why. The easy answer is I try to do the right thing, raise your children, work with your family, be a part of a family, do right by society, do right by your wife, those really important things. There is no doubt, and maybe this is, if you will, the punchline of this conversation, as an Israeli, the last 5 years, the why is fighting to protect democracy in Israel and fighting on behalf of the hostages. That's what you do. The how is you go out and you demonstrate. And not social media, with all due respect to TikTok, Schmicktalk, and all that, by getting out there and demonstrating, being loud. And yeah, sure, you have your interactions with the police. It's not fun. The verbal violence that has been thrown my way, it makes what happens in America, literally, with the exception maybe of Minneapolis, look like child's play. So to your question, the why for me in the last 5 years, democracy, hostages, the how, demonstration. I think it's probably when I was, in the 20 years I was in obviously, be an academic and write, contribute, and all that. The 20 years that I was in the IDF, from posting to posting, obviously rule of law, rule of law, rule of law. Work with commanders, but also the how is for me the overarching respect and protection of the rule of law. And at the end of the day, if you connect all of these dots, disparate dots together, I have no doubt that if you connect and then work backwards, reverse engineer, I don't think there's any doubt that at the end of the day, as I said to you when we first began, all roads run through the Holocaust. I don't think that there's any doubt whatsoever. Whether you live it, I mean, as a second generation, you try to educate on it. That I think, obviously, in addition to my family, right? But I think that there is no doubt that the Holocaust, the primacy of the Holocaust as the son of, is what I think. If you connect all of these dots, that is the connector of the dots.
I appreciate you sharing that. I appreciate you coming on today to give your ideas and your perspective to our listeners. As a practical takeaway for people listening, right? You've achieved certain things throughout your life, and it takes a certain amount of discipline or routine in the small moments, right, where no one's looking, to maintain progress and stay on that path to achieve whatever goal or mission or why it is you're trying to fulfill and realize. So what disciplines, practices, parts of your routine have kind of kept you on your path through your career and your life?
So whatever very, very modest achievements I may have had, I am clearly a person of habit. I don't think there's any doubt. I'm smiling because if my family would hear, they'd be probably, like rolling their eyes, right? I get up, 3, 4 in the morning. I exercise 4 times a week, 5. I try to take really good care of myself, eat right. I mean, literally all I do, I'm probably the most boring person you've ever met. I work out, I read a lot. I'm a huge sports fan. I mean, I can play sports trivia with you every which way. I love music. Can't play music. And when I'm home it's obviously, obviously my family, 100%, honestly. But in that sense, I don't think in that sense, I'm any different from anyone else. Work, discipline, workout, family, eat right, super focused. I love teaching. It's an honor to teach. I mean, the law students, obviously. It's fun. And I grew up as the son of an educator, if you will. And he was the grandson of an important rabbi. So it's obviously his DNA runs through the fam. But that way, I don't think I'm very different from anyone else. And I don't think I am, if I may, particularly interesting. You get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, you have your orange juice, your coffee, you work out, and then you start working.
I mean, that's humble of you. Many people can't stick to a boring routine like that, a regimen.
I mean, it is what it is. But I think it's also important. I really am a huge sports fan. As a matter of fact, when I was in college with my college roommate, we were the play-by-play for Quinney College on the radio station. He was a play-by-play, and I was the color commentator. When I watch sports on TV, I don't need the announcers. I mute it because I can do my own announcing. And I really do love sports, and I really do love music. Music from the 60s and the 1960s and 1970s. But the rest of the time, again, as I say, I read a lot. That's what I enjoy doing.
Amazing. Before we end, a final message from you to any of our listeners who may be intimidated to go out into the world and demonstrate whatever that means, whether it's through their writing, through their voice, not necessarily on any of the issues we've talked about, just in general. how would you empower
One
a
word.
young person?
Don't walk away from harm to another. Do not walk away from harm to another. Full stop.
Simple.
Simple as can be, except it's not.
Yeah. Professor Guiora, thank you so much
Thank you for having me.
for coming on the podcast.
Sure.
Really appreciate it. And I always end off by saying that if something in this conversation sparks something within you, share it with someone who may also learn from the idea shared today. This idea comes from Judaism that says if we change one person's life, it's as if we've changed the world in its entirety. And so the goal is to do just exactly that. So thank you for tuning in, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much.